The following is a presentation of the Six Arrows Radio Network.
Today on the Workbench, it's Maker Faire Bay Area and Field Day Prep. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Workbench. I'm your host, George, KJ6VU.
And I'm Jeremy, KF7IJZ.
This episode of the Workbench is brought to you by Elecraft, makers of high-performance radios, amplifiers, and other great station accessories. Check them out at www.elecraft.com. And by Autodesk, the makers of Eagle PCB design tools, the software we use to design all of our Workbench build projects. For more info and your free copy of Eagle, go to www.autodesk.com/Eagle today.
Welcome to the Ham Radio 360 Workbench Podcast, your bi-weekly deep dive on technical and maker topics of interest to the radio amateur. George, this is the first time we've talked, I think, in person-ish since Dayton.
Yeah, I'm just finally getting over the travel lag and sorting through all the too many things I want to do now. How was your last week?
Last week was pretty busy and frustrating and sad. I'm still suffering from withdrawal from Hamvention, and also been spending a lot of time catching up on other media that covered it. Also want to give a shout out to Jason from Ham Radio 2.0, who celebrated his 100th episode this week, which is a pretty big milestone for them.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So tonight, we're not alone. In fact, actually, we have the largest group ensemble ever brought together for a Ham Radio 360 Workbench podcast.
Actually, we have a few returning guests. You want to run down the list here?
All right. First of all, we have Barrick Dunn, K6BEZ. Barrick?
Hello. Glad to be back.
We have Kenneth Finnegan at KWF. I never remember your call sign.
It's a W6. It's a W6KWF. I try to make it easy. Hey guys, I'm glad to be here as always.
All right, and then finally we have David Witkowski, which, David, I don't even know your call sign. I am the worst host ever.
Okay. It's Whiskey 6 Delta Tango Whiskey, W6DTW.
Alrighty. George, 2 weeks ago when me, you, and Kale were in Xenia, Ohio, this collection of guests were all the way on the other side of the country attending the 2017 Bay Area Maker Faire.
I was kind of jealous because I haven't been to the Maker Faire in, like 6 or 7 years, because I've been at the Hamvention every year since then. So I think there's a lot of changes have happened in the last few years.
Well, and that's certainly what we're going to deep dive on this evening, along with some other topics. Before we get into that, as is customary here on the Workbench, let's start off with getting Workbench reports, and I'm going to start with our guests. And David, since I completely had no clue what your call sign is, I'll start with you. What's on your Workbench these days?
So about a week ago, I decided that I was going to try to build up a music system. Spotify had a 3 months for 99 cents trial. So I thought, okay, well, fine, I'll actually pay Spotify again, considering that I've been, using them for free for God knows how long. So I thought, well, what am I going to use? And I really want to attach it to my stereo. So turns out that there is a music player for Raspberry Pi that you can control with Spotify. So I've just been building up a little audio receiver, and then you control it with a phone. And so then now whenever I say, hey, I want to change this song, I just pull my phone out and I can tell my stereo to do something. And not amateur radio related, but it's fun. So I'm trying to make the audio sound better because the Raspberry Pi's audio is kind of Yankee.
Well, I was going to ask, have you looked into any of the there are several like quote unquote hi-fi DACs that are available?
Yeah, well, what I was going to do was just, I was going to get a hi-fi dongle and just plug it in USB. So and I tried it out. It's like, okay, that works. And it doesn't really sound very good, but it works. So now I just got to tune the audio.
Alrighty. And Kenneth, what's on your Workbench these days?
Well, I mean, first of all, of course, Kale's Digipeater is still sitting on my Workbench, and I'm working on it.
Saw a picture of that this week.
Yeah, I'm working on it as I can. As I'm running into some weird problems with, TNCs and audio cables and stuff, but that is moving forward. So if you guys if anyone's wondering where that's going, it's still moving along. Kind of the thing at the top of the pile on my Workbench right now is I actually tweeted about this quite a bit for Maker Faire. I built a Raspberry Pi compute cluster, kind of between Jeremy and all of my. It's one of those things that kind of stuck in my brain more than a year ago and kind of was gnawing at me for a long time. And I finally decide to just pull the trigger on $300 worth of Raspberry Pis and accessories and stuff. And it's all mounted on DIN rail, right? DIN rail is this kind of standardized industrial mounting clip. And it's got this great feature of everything that you buy that has a DIN rail clip on the back of it. It has this great 2 or 3x premium on it. So it's a great way to make everything more expensive. But I've always wanted to build a cluster for a long time, and between kind of you building yours and doing some interesting stuff with it, and just kind of everyone else that I see online, if you go on YouTube and search for Raspberry Pi clusters, the number of videos is just ridiculous. But for Maker Faire, I built a Raspberry Pi cluster for the after parties, which we'll talk about later, and so it was kind of this comedy of errors for the whole week before Maker Faire, trying to get 5 amps at 5 volts to power these Raspberry Pis. I managed to blow up something like 3 or 4 different voltage regulators before I finally gave up. And so at this point, I'm trying to figure out how to actually get, a power supply to get this thing, up and stable. But that's kind of been my go-to project for the last few weeks.
Well, a couple things about that is I had tweeted at you several times. This is an opportunity for us to actually design a power supply that plugs in GPIO and doesn't rely on a bunch of USB cables. Because I had shared with you the Murata little micro switchers.
Yeah, I looked at those. And yeah, so I had definitely considered that, right? Because the Raspberry Pi is powered over micro USB, which is not a particularly convenient power connector. I'm not a big fan, but that's kind of what everyone's standardized on for 5 volts. But that same 5 volt rail post the fuse is also available on the 40-pin GPIO header. And so I also seriously considered this of, well, do I power the Pis off of that header with some sort of cabling going back there? But kind of one of the things I really emphasized for Maker Faire in particular for this cluster is that the cable management for it is just gratuitously nice. And so the concept of having these micro USB cables coming out the front was actually somewhat of an advantage to me, because I just wanted more cables to control, and I didn't have time. I didn't realize how deep into this I was actually going to go until it was too late to even quick spin PCBs to like have a little like right angle adapter thing for the GPIO header. And so it was one of those things I just ran out of time for that, but it's still, I may eventually end up powering it off of the header with some, of those just 100 thou female connectors that you can build little cables with.
Yeah, and at this point, that would be the next thing I'd want to upgrade for mine is get away from the giant USB power supply that I have. Now, where I was inspired to build this from?
No, I didn't know where yours came from. I've seen the videos on yours and the thousands of views it has.
So the concept for me came from an article I read many years ago about there was a CS grad student at, I think, the University of North Dakota who was doing his research on more orchestration across hardware having nothing to do with the real compute load, and he couldn't get supercomputer time at the university. And so he went out and built a 42 node Raspberry Pi cluster built out of original Raspberry Pi Bs, just to be able to simulate all the orchestration and whatnot. Again, because he didn't need the compute power, he just needed to be able to show sharing massively distributed workloads over a system.
Oh, that's actually kind of really funny because, for the bring up test, I've been doing Einstein at home, much like you were doing, but I don't really have that much interest in just adding an extra 40 watt thermal load to my apartment because my power bill is high enough as is. I actually was planning on using this as some sort of orchestration trainer because I know almost nothing about that field, and I thought it would be something good for me to know as someone who brings up a lot of computers.
Another thing that is worth checking out is on Twitter at Alex Ellis UK. He's one of the Docker captains, and he and I met online as he was trying to do some Docker swarms across multiple Pis. And he's done a lot of demonstrations at like DockerCon and whatnot with Pi-based swarms and whatnot. So another way to share workloads, not like a MPI or anything, but another way to use all that hardware as one contiguous thing. So enough about Raspberry Pi. Sorry, geeking out. And then finally, coming to Barrick. Barrick, what's on your workbench?
Well, other than the box load of stuff that I still haven't unpacked from Maker Faire, I've been trying to get ready for Field Day, but doing remote control. So for Field Day, I'm going to have a computer running FLDigi, controlling my ICOM 7300. And I was at work on my lunch hour, playing about with it, remote control, using Chrome Remote Desktop. And I ended up hitting the tune button on the radio remote control panel. And of course, hypothetically, if the SWR was high enough, so enough power came back and disrupted the CAT connection to the computer, meaning I could no longer talk to the rig by the remote control, hypothetically, I might have had a 20-minute mad dash home to turn the radio off before it turned into a molten slag of solder on the desk. Don't ask me how I know this. So the take-home from this is always set the, by default, off timeout timer on the radio if you're going to be messing around with remote control. So that's my lesson for the last week.
That sounds like a really good lesson.
Yes, and the radio still works. So we can use it for Field Day, George.
So are you going to bring the Pi? So is it like mounted like Pi in a display to run FLDigi?
It's going to be the same as I did last year, but it's I've got the Pi in one of those little fan boxes, and I've got a monitor which runs off 12 volts. I used the smaller monitor before a couple of years ago, but that just gets frustrating. So I've got like a normal size desk monitor which happens to run off 12 volts. Which I got from Weird Stuff for about $5. I think they charged me for it. And so I don't want to go through the whole hassle of forcing us to use a small screen. Let's be civilized here.
Sorry, we're not backpacking in for Field Day.
What's Weird Stuff?
Oh yeah, you could do a whole episode on that. And it's a store in the Bay Area where some people say electronics goes to die, but it's got all sorts of surplus stuff, some computer, some not. It's basically electronic stuff, and you can go and spend like literally a day in there just wandering around. And it's kind of depressing because I actually saw some of the stuff that I used to work on at Hewlett Packard when I was an intern there, and they had that product kind of in a box in the back just gathering dust.
Well, if you really want to get depressed, go to the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, and then you'll walk around and say, hey, I used to work on that thing, and it's in a museum.
Yep.
I was actually at Weird Stuff, 2 weeks ago. As I always make a point when any of my nerdy friends from out of town fly in, I'll take them on kind of a circuit of the shops. And so we'll hit up Hal Ted and Weird Stuff and Anchor and all these little weird electronic stores that are like, and Weird Stuff kind of is the most complete one, right? Because a lot of the other shops, you'll like be buying individual liquid crystal displays or resistors. But yeah, Weird Stuff. It's a great store because you go in there and like the front half of it is trying to be like a secondhand retail desktop computer store, which, isn't so much a thing anymore. But you go in the back and it's got aisles and aisles of industrial shelving with bins of it's got an entire bin that is just network interface cards. And so you go in there and they've got, PCI cards, PCIe cards. They've got old fiber NICs. They've got ISA NICs. They've got, base 2 Ethernet stuff. It's a great place to go buy all sorts of weird old stuff.
So I just noted, I'm on their website now, which is weirdstuff.com, all one word. And there's actually in the main nav an item for Sun Microsystems. So that's pretty awesome.
Well, the webpage doesn't do it credit.
Oh, yeah, no.
You really have to see it. You really have to.
It's one of those things that kind of their flex inventory is the most, like the stuff that comes in and then disappears real fast is, of course, the most interesting. And so I've gone in there one day and they had an entire pallet of traffic signal left turn arrows.
Which, of course, you bought.
How many did you buy?
I mean, for $15, how can a college student say no? One thing you don't appreciate setting one until you set one of these things up in your dorm and plug it in because they run on 120 volts. traffic signal lights are so much brighter than you ever imagined they are until you get one in the little room and you plug it in, and it's this dazzling beacon of green left turning. But yeah, they've got all sorts of great little stuff like that.
Well, George, what's on your workbench?
Geez, besides wrapping up the build project stuff, the one project I've been playing around with for a while, we've built a TCP/IP backbone data net, or starting to connect the repeater sites together. And one of the parts of that project has been to get our D-Star 1.2 gig DD module, the digital data module, working. And I finally got it to work. So Rich, KC6OBJ, and I have been working on this thing off and on for a while. And this week we actually made it work. So I have a ID1 1.2 gig transceiver at the house with an antenna on the roof, and I can talk to the repeater site and send TCP/IP traffic from here to the hilltop at a whopping 75 kilobits per second, which is not really saying much these days, except for the fact that it's our own private data network, and that's kind of cool. And then up at the repeater site, we do have internet access, so I could go out on the internet and do some speed testing and stuff like that. But getting everything configured and all the right network settings and all that just took some time to sort out. But we finally got it up and running, and it's working, and that's great. So that will be a component of our IP backbone. And we've got some other thoughts going on. I met the guys at the at Hamvention doing Arden, so we're going to look into some of the stuff they're doing with new firmware for some of their IP ubiquity radios. But we'll be essentially blending together some 3.4 gig infrastructure that we already have now, plus this 1.2 gig slow speed IP data modules. So
it's
anyway,
funny, it's funny that you call, would you say 75 kilobit?
Yeah.
It's funny that you call that slow speed in a world where most people are working with, 1200 baud.
Well, it's all relative, isn't it?
George has first world problems.
Yeah. That's right.
Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is with the ID1, I've forgotten what I was going to say, but that's okay.
So, by the way, if anybody out there has an ID1 and you want to sell it, let me know, because we want to package up some what we call flyaway cases. They're basically portable points of presence. So you have this little valise, this little suitcase. You open it up. It's got a 1.2 gig ID1 to uplink to the mountaintop and a Wi-Fi access point. So the client computers and phones and whatever can connect to the access point and then would uplink to the hilltop. The first version of that we built had a 3.4 gig ubiquity radio as the uplink. And of course, that's much faster. The problem with it is that the links are very finicky because there's more path loss because it's much lower power radios. And at that frequency of more loss. So there's probably a good 20 dB plus difference between the D-Star data radios and the ubiquity stuff. But we'll probably wind up putting both in the portable cases. But the whole idea is that if some disaster happens and you need communications at that incident, you could take one of these cases in a tripod and set it up in like 5 minutes, and you'd have IP connectivity from the ground up to the hilltop. We're also linking from between our two repeater sites. So the South Bay and the East Bay repeater already has a running 3.4 gig IP backbone between the sites. So the idea is to have up and down links at the repeater sites as well as the backhaul. So it's pretty cool, actually. So it's fun to actually be able to take some commercial stuff and some ham stuff and make it work together.
So your little deploy kits, do they have like little foldable dishes that pop out like old sat phones in the movies?
It would look cool if it did. I actually looked at eBay for what was it, like Milstar antennas, but they're all 220 megahertz, so it doesn't really do us any good.
Try wave stuff.
Yeah. So what we're running for the flyaway cases on 1.2 is a Yagi. I think it's made by Comtelco. They're about a foot and a half feet long, to 2 feet long, about 7 or 8 elements. And for 3.4 gigs, we were using these Ubiquity radios that are integrated radios and patch antennas. They're really not much gain. And actually, your point about a more directional antenna is probably the right one. I think it would be better if we had some parabolics to point at the hill. We're running parabolic antennas between the two repeater sites, so probably from the ground up to the hill, that would make sense too. The antennas up at the hill on 3.4 going to the ground are these big panels. They're like 120 degree sector panel antenna pointed to the ground.
That's cool.
The big problem with that, by the way, is not only do you have more path loss, but if you have trees and stuff like that in the way, the absorption is pretty high. So it really kills your signal.
I remember what I was going to say. So when you play around with the 1.2 gig D-Star data stuff, it really makes you appreciate as a consumer all of the RF engineering you get out of the box for free with Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as far as, handling multiple clients simultaneously and all that stuff.
Yeah, I haven't tried multiple clients connected to the AP. I think it would actually work. I've seen some videos of people doing this, and I think it all works as you would expect it. Of course, you're shoving multiple people's data through a fairly small pipe, so that's a little bit of a challenge, but it should work. I mean, the whole point of having the router at the client side on the ground is to support multiple users. You just have to be really, really careful. You don't go to a website that's very graphics rich and then you're just banging on the thing for a long time to get that silly graphics through. But
you should only be browsing with links.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, I started looking around for a set of websites and programs that are only text-based for exactly that reason. The other thing that I want to play with is the D-Star DRATS program could be run over this, even if you don't use the D-Star slow speed data. That's a whole separate optional thing we could do. But just using that, the DRATS program, I think could be really powerful because it does simple emailing and chat, and it does the incident emergency, whatever they call it, the ICS forms, where you just send the data on the forms. So this infrastructure has lots of potential applications. The reason we did it was to support the Red Cross and for that matter, anybody else who we're working with. But Red Cross is our main organization that we support here in the Bay Area. And when things happen, they really need infrastructure, and hopefully we'll be able to provide that.
Well, then make sure that you margin in rain fade. Because that's always something you want to think about on the gigahertz radios, is that you've got about a 15 dB loss when it's raining, which is usually when you need this stuff.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to augment the whole system with the 1.2 gig stuff, because although at 1.2 you do get some absorption, if you're powering up with 10 watts over 1.2 in a directional antenna, then you're pretty likely to make the shot. But as opposed to a Wi-Fi radio, you're running, milliwatts, maybe 100 milliwatts into a 6 dB gain panel. At 3 times the frequency. So there's just a lot more path loss and absorption with the rain and all. So it's, on the test day, it'll probably work great. But on the day when it's a disaster, then it's probably not so good. So we want to have multiple alternative paths. The other thing that we want to take a look at is maybe augment it with some ground-based stations. So independent of this, there's interest in looking at what's variously called HSMM and various mesh Wi-Fi systems, which I think are a little bit more difficult to do that, terrestrially between houses and whatnot. But that could supplement in some areas. So anyway, that's the big breakthrough this week, is getting this DD module thing to work.
Well, cool. So who's going to ask?
So Jeremy, hey Jeremy, what's on your bench?
Well, you go back to the fact that we told people that your kitchen table can be your workbench. If there is a horizontal surface in this house with more than 4 square feet of area, I have occupied it with a project. Right now, the thing that I've spent the most time on last weekend is my family went out of town last weekend over the Memorial Day weekend, and my wife was being very kind to me to try to let me get some focused time to work on building my 3D printing kit, the Ultibots D300 VS, which I received about 5-6 weeks ago and had really made no meaningful progress on it. And of course, wouldn't you know it, I got sick, really sick actually over the weekend, and lost pretty much an entire day, and then live streamed the build, which actually Kenneth came and hung out for some on Sunday, and I did a little bit more on Monday. And about halfway through the total build, the step I have to pick up from there involves taking like I actually don't even know how long it is, but a very huge spool of pulley cable, GT2 pulley cable, and cutting it into 3 same size lengths. And of course, they don't give you the dimensions, so I have to like unwind this in a big area of floor and figure that out. But this printer has turned out to be much larger. And then I was like, I mean, I've seen it in person before, but having it in my own house and seeing that my daughter can actually stand inside of it is pretty eye-opening. I will actually be able to print small trash cans with this thing.
Custom bespoke bathroom trash cans.
Yes, yeah. I look for my Etsy site coming soon.
Real life-size replicas of your children.
Yeah, I could get like one of the photogrammetry apps and scan my children and actually print out, copies. And then when they misbehave, threaten them that I will replace them with a low-resolution, low-poly clone.
You're such a good dad.
Well, I grew up in the internet age as a father. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the most frustrating things I've ever done building this kit, because I really don't like mechanical things with small. I don't have small. You've seen my hands; they're not small hands designed for delicate things. And I'm working with like nuts that are 2 millimeters large and trying to get them into 1.5 millimeter holes, and there's a lot of grunting and sweating and cursing. Other than that, it's funny. I still haven't even really had an opportunity to play with all of the stuff I bought at Dayton.
What did you buy at Dayton?
The short list is I bought a Hytera handheld DMR radio, which I'm very happy with. Finally have that set up for one repeater in the area, but I have to build a massive code plug by hand because there aren't a lot of Hytera radios out there, and doesn't seem to be any in our area owned by anybody who knows what the internet is. I bought a Regal single channel 30 volt 5 amp power supply, and it is about as bare bones as it gets. The only annoyance I've had with that so far is the fan runs continuously, and it weighs like 25 pounds. So it's definitely a linear, very precise power supply, just not really a lot of features, which I was a little bit surprised by, but that's okay. I'll live. It meets the need. I know I bought one of these little like micro 25 watt 2 meter 440 transceivers that's waterproof. I mean, I've turned that on just to prove that it powers on, but haven't really done anything with it. And then bought a ton of accessories. Actually, Barrick. So I don't know if George told you, we shared our booth with airspy.us, and they were selling the wideband noise sources and the directional couplers that are made by the dude who was selling them on eBay. And so I picked those up to create my poor man's spectrum analyzer stuff.
I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, and I mean, that was part of the whole deal, is trying to come up with a poor man's approximation for a lot of this stuff, which actually probably could be a good show topic in the future, is how do I simulate test equipment without breaking the bank. I picked up a couple of inline not filters, but pads as well, little SMA pads. But yeah, I'm like very little of that have I had a chance to play with.
But you got lots of stuff queued up.
Yes.
Hey, I got to tell you, I picked up an MD380 DMR radio and the Shark RF open spot.
Yep.
And I played with both a bit. Once I got home, I was able to shove in the local code plug and actually talk to a few people. So that was cool. We could do a whole show on what's up with DMR, and also maybe a little compare and contrast with Fusion D-Star. We should probably hold it for that. But that's been kind of interesting. I got to tell you, the open spot is really nice. I think those guys did a super duper job on it, because the whole UI is on the web. So you point your browser at the device, and it serves up a web page, and you tell it what you want to connect to or what modem you want to use and all that, because it supports DMR, D-Star, and Fusion. So that's a pretty slick thing. So I've been very impressed with that. So yeah, that sounds like a topic we should probably follow up on.
Yes, and in the meantime,
so go ahead. So just one quick question: did you load up Travis's custom firmware onto the 380?
Not yet. No, excellent question. No. So for the listeners, Travis, who we talked about at Hamvention, he reverse engineered or hacked into the firmware in the MD380 handy talkie by Titera, and improved the firmware to add some features. And I need to do that. So great question. Have you done that?
I haven't actually done it. I do know digital voice stuff. I am so entrenched in analog. I'm perfectly happy with it.
Yeah. By the way, I'll spill the beans on one first impression. So my impression of DMR before I got it was, well, it's a newer codec, so boy, the audio will be so much better than D-Star. Although I like D-Star, I have no problem with the audio quality. So I get the DMR radio, and I finally hear a station, and I'm thinking to myself, it sounds just like D-Star. So I think I was very surprised that it wasn't any better than what I already had. But anyway,
it's newer, so it's a better codec. But I mean, a newer, better digital codec is still a low bitrate digital codec.
I highly recommend you pull out a D-Star radio and listen to them side by side, and you should tell the difference, unless your ear is just rubbish.
I think that the biggest difference is not the fidelity, but the problem with this is that, to me, I could listen to two different people on D-Star, and the timbre of the voice will make a big difference in terms of how natural or not natural the voice sounds to me. So to me, the D-Star and DMR voices I've heard largely sound the same. I think the biggest difference is, I think in the DMR coding, there's some forward error correction, because DMR D-Star, when it gets noisy, the codec just goes to gibberish really easily. I think the DMR codec must have better error correction in it, because it does break up. But when it does break up, it's not just a bunch of random phonemes. It's kind of a stuttery, kind of repeat the last phoneme until it stops. So it sounds different, but I think it's a little bit better quality in that regard. So.
Yeah, and one thing about digital voice that a lot of people don't appreciate is when you listening to people over communications channels like amateur radio, it's a very difficult learned skill, right? And so contesting is always great for kind of learning how to listen to people on a single sideband channel or an analog FM channel. And digital voice channels are very much, it's a new skill, right? You need to learn how to understand what people are saying over one of these codecs. And so, yeah, the first time you pick it up, it's going to be really hard. But talking to a lot of public safety and EMS guys that use digital radios, they're like, yeah, it was awful for the first month, but you kind of learn how to use it and how to understand people on it, and it does get quite a bit better.
I think that's an excellent point. In fact, Kenneth, when I first started on listening on D-Star, it doesn't sound like single sideband, but it reminded me very much of that. So I think your example is right on. It sounds weird at first, and after a while, you do kind of get used to it. So the capability of what you can do with the digital radios is really impressive. So that doesn't put me off. I mean, the digital audio doesn't make me not want to do it at all. In fact, I think it's very cool. But anyway, we should all talk more about the digital radios later, and perhaps we should focus a bit on Maker Faire.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to pick David, Kenneth, and Barrick's minds for their impressions of Maker Faire this year. These guys have been going together for a while, and what's cool is there were some interesting things that happened this year as far as trying to bring amateur radio more into the Maker movement and the Maker fold, and we will talk about those when we get back.
Elecraft is a premier provider of high-performance transceivers like the K3S and the portable KX3, and their new super portable compact KX2, which is my top pick as a portable HF rig today. It runs 10 watts, 80 through 10 meters, single sideband, CW, and data modes. It's a fantastic little radio, and you'll be amazed when you see what kind of performance you can get out of something this small. And a high-capacity internal battery lets you run the radio for several hours, whether you're on the trail, camping, or taking the radio anywhere portable. You'll really enjoy using this little rig. With an excellent reputation for product quality, innovative designs, and customer service, check out Elecraft at www.elecraft.com. This episode of The Workbench is brought to you by Autodesk Eagle PCB Design Tools. All of our projects we're doing on the Workbench use Eagle. It's great for schematic capture and board layout. You can easily generate all of the output files necessary to manufacture a circuit board. And whether you're building one board or 100 boards for your friends,
use Eagle Tools because they have really excellent support. They've got a great library of available components. It's widely used amongst the maker and the professional board design tool. You'll enjoy using the tools, and there's a lot of great new features. Check it out at autodesk.com/Eagle, and you could download a free copy of the PCB design tool today and get started doing your project.
So while we were enjoying our time in our new home at the Greene County Fairgrounds, David, Kenneth, and Barrick were all on the other coast out at the San Mateo Event Center attending the Bay Area Maker Faire. David, why don't you give us just a little bit of history about Maker Faire and also give us a little bit of a description of what it is?
Sure. So the Maker Faire was an outgrowth of Burning Man, which they wanted to host something that was more dedicated just towards the art and technology that was at Burning Man. So in 2005, they held the first one in San Mateo, and had a good turnout. It was maybe 10,000 something people, but the next year, 2006, was the year that it really started to take off, and I think that was something on the order of 85,000 to 90,000 people. And then since then, it's just grown into the point where the past few years, we've had over 150,000 people during the course of the 3-day event. And it's grown beyond to that is that they've got now an Educators Day on Friday and such. But it's extremely hard to describe the Maker Faire without being there. But if you take Hamvention and add on everything from blacksmithing to a life-size mousetrap to people that build devices out of parts to shoot flames 40 feet in the sky, a giant robotic giraffe, people that do everything from textiles to food to using old pieces of car parts like fenders from cars that have been damaged to make art. It's really hard to describe the Maker Faire without experiencing it. But it's the way that I would put it is that it's a gathering of people who enjoy working with their hands, converting things into something else, voiding warranties, being very active in kind of looking at the questions of not only does this thing work, but tearing it apart to ask the question, how does it work?
So one of the things that does seem to be pretty prevalent is a connection between Maker Faire and Make Magazine.
It is the same company. So Make Magazine was, if you remember the old O'Reilly computer books, the O'Reilly Media, they were the ones who put on the original Maker Fairs. They spun off an organization called Maker Media. And Maker Media now runs the fairs, but they also are the producers of Make Magazine.
All right, so this year, the three of you were together, but this isn't the first time that you guys have been together at Maker Faire.
No, it's not. I've been doing projects at Maker Faire. I applied for my first project 5 years ago, so this is my 5th year. I think, Barrick, you've been with me for 4, if I'm not mistaken.
I thought it was 4 or 5, but you did one before me, so yeah, it must be 4.
And then Kenneth, this was your 2nd year with us. So we had this year we had a large team. There was a group of people from Baynet, as you would expect, but we also had some students from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which, as your listeners may know, has an amateur radio program, and in fact, for the electrical engineering track, they require their students to get an amateur radio license. And so guys like Kenneth Finnegan and Marcel Stieber have graduated from that program. And so we have a pretty strong connection with Cal Poly. So they actually had 2 students come up from Cal Poly. They traveled to be in our booth this year.
And was the booth specifically the Baynet group, or was it some other group?
No, it was a Baynet organized, but we have a sort of a, run what you brung mentality. So we asked the Cal Poly guys to come and bring some technology. Barrick brought technology with his Raspberry Pi test equipment. We have Bernard, I'm going to butcher his name, Bernard. I'm sorry. Bernard Van Heck, who brings in a lot of APRS test gear. Peter Nordquist, again, Peter, I'm sorry. He brings in ADS-B receivers and some satellite receivers. And then we had the students from Cal Poly who brought a loop antenna and a Elecraft-based portable radio kit that they've been working on. And one of the things that has been really great for the Faire over the past couple of years has been that Kenneth Finnegan has brought in his portable repeater. Frankly, the Maker Faire is a giant Part 15 violation. When everyone shows up and you get so many people in one place, with not only the displays and the projects that people are working on, which typically are busted out of their cases so that you can see the guts. So there's not a lot of RFI, EMI shielding on this. Plus everybody's phones, all their Wi-Fi and their Bluetooth headsets and everything. The RF noise floor goes through the roof. The cell site gets overloaded almost immediately. And I've had cases where a text message took 7 hours to go out. So communications is really a problem. So Kenneth bringing in his repeater has just been a godsend because we set it up in the middle of the Baynet booth, and it becomes the amateur radio repeater for the entire Faire, and it covers really well not only the Faire but out into the parking lot areas. And so having that as a communications method has been fantastic, and it's always great that he brings that in.
So Kenneth, tell us about your portable repeater.
Yeah. So I mean, it really, as far as for the Faire itself, it's proven to be real useful because it's a real good demonstration of the advantages of a real base station antenna and a few more watts over HTs. Because like a lot of people are always really surprised. They're like, yeah, like we brought our amateur radios to Maker Faire and we were planning on just operating simplex. But if you're not in the same building, even simplex amateur radio is just useless. And so that's why we've started bringing this up. But what it is it's pretty much mostly just a off-the-shelf Motorola GR1225, which was one of their. It was kind of, I think it was sold as like a desktop repeater system, right? And so it's not like I took two mobile rigs and a repeater controller and cobbled it together. It's a little bit more nicer than that. But the GR1225 was this great desktop repeater that Motorola made. And how I actually ended up with this originally was I was doing event support for the Wildflower Triathlon when I was down at Cal Poly. And for the Wildflower Triathlon, it was at the time before the drought, it was this huge event where we had something like 8,000 athletes. And we actually built this communication system that included 6 temporary portable repeaters. And on those 6 repeaters, we actually on a typical year, we had about 250 or 300 volunteers that weren't amateur operators, but were just, standard volunteers show up, and we would train them and give them commercial radios and operate them Part 90. And so every year we would rent 300 HTs and 6 repeaters from some national rental company. So a lot of the years it was from Bearcom. And anyone who has worked with Bearcom will tell you all the horror stories of the hardware that shows up and isn't quite what they ordered or isn't quite working because Bearcom, like a rental company, like their equipment has just seen to the end of the world and back. It really gets beat up. For HTs, that's not kind of a big deal because you have 300 of them, and if a few of them show up DOA, they don't work. But as one of the communications volunteers, it was my job to make sure that the 6 repeaters we got all worked and were running all weekend. And so every year it was a Thursday night when the FedEx box shows up with these 6 repeaters. We were killing ourselves trying to get, turns out, oh, hey, they didn't include a duplexer, or the duplexer wasn't tuned, or there's no power cables. And so a couple of my buddies and I, like Marcel and myself, we finally got so fed up with it that we're like, how much is a repeater, one of these repeaters on eBay, right? So you go look on eBay at a GR1225 in questionably usable working condition. It's only like $400. And
now,
so
to be clear on that, I'm assuming we're talking about UHF versions.
Yeah. So, they also come as VHF, but the enclosure, the nice enclosure is designed to fit one of those flat pack notch only duplexers, which, I mean, repeaters again is a whole nother talk. The notch only duplexers, you can't use those on amateur 2 meter because the band's only 4 megahertz wide, and so you can't get the 600 kilohertz splits with flat pack duplexers. So yeah, these are all UHF.
And it looks like there's at least 2 versions.
That for $400, yeah, there's a high power version which is 45 watts, and then there's a low power version that's only 10 watts. And so we would buy the high power ones, and then the problem with these is that Motorola underspec'd the heatsink. The heatsink at 45 watts is rated for 50% duty cycle, 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off. No one that uses a radio, I mean, amateurs, I would say, are particularly bad about keeping a repeater keyed up for 4 hours. But I mean, commercial users are bad about this too. And so people would buy these things, crank them up to 45 watts, and then the standard failure mode that we saw in all these repeaters, we bought about 8 of them. The PA would overheat, the solder would melt, and components would fall off the board. Motorola overspec'd everything else so well that it was no problem. The components were all perfectly fine. They were just rattling around inside the case. And so we would buy these repeaters, open them up, solder the capacitors back down on the board, and then we had working repeaters. And so we now have 6 of these things in portable hard cases. So I throw one in the back of my pickup truck, drive to Maker Faire, pull it out, and turn it on. And it's not much to look at, so I actually bring another one just to have there in case anyone's interested.
Awesome. And do you just put an antenna up on like a big mast or something?
So what I use is a speaker tripod. You can get like rock concert speaker tripods. You can get those for like $30 on Amazon. So it's a $30 speaker tripod, a X30 Diamond. Diamond makes those. X30 base station antenna.
Yep, yeah, that's a Diamond.
And then I've got everything adapted down to BNC as I standardized all of my radios on BNC connectors. And so I just bring a couple of BNC jumpers, and however far away they are, just quick bayonet connection. Plug it into the wall and turn it on. We're ready to go. All right. So the whole setup for it's only about 10, 15 minutes.
Well, awesome. So Barrick, what did you bring to show off in the booth at Maker Faire?
Well, the previous year, it was just, I took some SDR test equipment just as an eye catcher. And it turned out that flashing screens actually attract a lot of people. So this year I kind of put it all on one big display board, so I didn't have to reconfigure on the fly. But it is basically a cluster of pies with a RTL SDR on each one. One of them was just showing off GQRX receiving a local FM broadcast station, which was about the only thing getting through the Part 15 noise or violating noise. And then I had a filter measurement using a noise source, and then I also had a antenna measurement using a noise source. And I also had the Ham Radio 360 analyzer built-up kit, which I was showing people as well. So that's what I had.
So what software were you using to actually look at the antenna and the filter data?
I actually made a Python script. I'm a hardware guy normally, so the Python code is a little embarrassing. But there's this Python library called RTL or PyRTL, and I was using it as a swept power meter. So it would just go over a whole bunch of frequencies and stepping in and taking a power measurement at that time at each one, and then would draw a graph after the sweep. So yeah, those two were homebrew ones, and I keep meaning to dress up that code so people can use it. But as I said, I'm sorry.
No, that's really awesome, because I mean, obviously the Pi doesn't have a ton of power on it, and if you are just using the hardware for sampling and then are doing very purpose-built analysis with it, and I had no idea there was a Python library for interacting with that, so that's really cool.
Yeah, I was trying to mess around with the, what do they call it, the RTL span stuff, which was a library for basically the the RTL SDR can only do like a 2 megahertz sweep as such. It can pull in about 2 megahertz at a time. But if you do a stepped sweep, which is kind of how most professional pieces of test equipment work, they don't pull in like all 40 gigahertz sideways. They'll do it in a step, or they'll have a stepped sweep. So I'm just doing the same thing that your, I don't know, $20,000 piece of name your big three test equipment vendor that they would do. I'm doing the same thing that they would do, although it's not as scientific grade stuff, but it's definitely a lot easier for hams and hobbyists to afford.
Right, and we've talked before about indication versus precision, right?
Yeah, and when you say you're making a UHF antenna, you just want to know when to stop cutting when it's actually on frequency. But actually, I did show a graph of the UHF antenna measured with both this cheap piece of test equipment and also a company I used to work for sold a very expensive test equipment, and I showed the same data from both the expensive test equipment and this homemade one, and you couldn't tell the difference. The actual A to D converter is actually they're pretty linear when you get down to it. I mean, an A to D is an A to D, and okay, the expensive one might have more bits, but even an 8-bit one can see maybe 50 dB down, and that's actually pretty impressive for the money you didn't spend.
Yeah, because I mean those dongles, something like an RTL SDR-V3 is $20 without the antenna. I mean, it's insane. And if you were, I mean, did you play around with decimation at all?
No, I didn't. I just wanted to show I could slam something together that would work. That's more on the same lines as the Ham Radio 360, that K6BEZ antenna analyzer. That was more an exercise that I showed off at Pacificon many years ago. Instead of having something that was really good out of the box, my intent, and especially at Maker Faire, was just show people they can build their own stuff. So it's not necessarily pretending to be fast or complicated. It's just, what do I do with stuff I got in my bits box? So playing around with decimation would have more, if anyone's looking at the code, that would be a kind of head scratcher, like, what's this doing? And I didn't want to necessarily have that obstacle in the way. I just wanted to make it go as smoothly and as understandable as possible. So
that makes sense. By the way, the antenna analyzer, lots of people came up. There were actually several people that had their antenna analyzers with them. And they were like, look, I built it. One of the things that was cool is we ran into a group of people that actually got the Travis Goodspeed SI5351 oscillator kit to work in it. And of course, I have no idea how tuned it is for, things in VHF, but there were people that had gotten it to work and updated the code. And that's one of the coolest things to see, are all the mods that people have made, to that design that you had come up with in these boards.
Well, yeah, that's actually great news. My caveat for going to VHF, and especially UHF, you've got, using these leaded components, you're going to get a lot of parasitics. So you really want to go surface mount if you go up to those higher frequencies. So, hey, if it works, it's going to show you where your dip is, but your measurements are not going to be as good.
Yeah, the other thing that a lot of people were requesting was, when are you going to release a version that uses diodes that aren't made out of unobtainium?
Well, germanium diodes used to be it. That was the low voltage drop one, and that's kind of why I chose those. And also you could get them in through-hole. Now, trying to get some good Schottky diodes which will work and are actually through-hole was, I've actually got a bag of them on my desk, and over summer I actually want to, or maybe just after field day, I actually want to try and substitute that in and see if that will work. The last time I tried it, I can't remember why, but I ran into some issues. But I got some new diodes now, so I do really want to try that.
Cool. So one of the things that was interesting is there was a little bit of press this year where the league had actually posted on, and when I say the league, I mean the ARRL, they had actually posted on some social media that Maker Faire had extended a discount for hams to attend Maker Faire. I guess it should be specific, Bay Area Maker Faire. And so, just overall, as you guys have been attending this, what is the level of amateur radio participation and amateur radio awareness?
So I think that we do have a pretty good turnout from the amateur radio community. Of course, it's a spectrum of amateur radios.
No pun intended.
Yeah, it's an amateur radio operator. I mean, we get everything from, I've been licensed for 60 years and to people who just got licensed recently. We had, I think, one thing I noticed this year was there were a number of people who came by and said, well, I got licensed, but I never did anything with it. And of course, there's that famous metric that nobody likes to talk about, that 50% of people who get their license never actually use the license. So we had a number of people who came by and said, yeah, I did it, but then I never actually did anything with it. So kind of talking to them about getting started, getting them excited about some the aspects of the hobby that, in fact, may not involve a microphone, because I think a lot of that is mic shyness. So some people they have a funny thing about talking. But if you can show them APRS, then they get interested, because that doesn't involve picking up a microphone. We get a number of people who come by and they're interested. Peter, who is now one of our staple members of Baynet, who's been showing a lot of really interesting gear. He was actually somebody who came by the Maker Faire a few years ago prior to getting his license and got really interested. And then the next year he's like, hey, I got my license. And then the next year he was like, hey, why don't you come to the Maker Faire? And then we actually had him on stage at Baycon. So he's really become active. And so that's, one of our success stories, I think, is to expose people to it. But you get a lot of people who come by and say, oh yeah, my grandfather was a ham. Do you guys still do that? I thought that was gone. And if I had $1 for every time that somebody said that to me, I could buy you guys a hamburger. It's amazing how many people would say that they thought it was a dead hobby, that they thought it didn't even exist anymore. But I do think that our approach to the Maker Faire has been to not engage in the evangelism of the hobby, but so much to show what we're doing and let people come to us. And so our focus has been not on, handing out pamphlets to get licensed, but rather to hand out information about what we do and give people a chance to feel like they can be welcomed. And that's, part of what I think the brilliance of Barrick's approach has been is to show the SDRs. And the SDRs are nice entry-level pieces because it doesn't require a license. And that gets people into radio and gets them thinking about it. And then they realize, hey, I really want to transmit. And then you can kind of lead into a discussion about licensing.
Yeah, I found out the SDR, people are saying, oh, you don't need a license for that. And I say, as long as you don't transmit, you don't need a license. So I think we need to redefine the term shortwave listener to be, I don't know, radio frequency hacker or something. I don't know, but yeah. Actually, the other one that I see a lot of is people who, they say they're working on their license just so they can get extra range out of their quadcopters. They have no intent of ever picking up a microphone. And as far as I'm concerned, that's great, because radio is radio is radio, and you don't need Morse code. You don't even need a microphone. You're doing it to support the hobby that you're wanting, rather than, and you're actually getting into radio.
Well, for us,
and funny how a lot of those guys somehow a couple years later end up getting HTs and suddenly become real involved in groups like Baynet.
Yeah, well, we have a example of that. Jason K6 DGN, who found Baynet after he got his ham ticket. The reason he got his ham ticket was exactly that, to fly his Trine quadcopters, and wound up really liking ham radio and then spending a lot more time on ham radio. And now he kind of goes back and forth. By the way, on Curtis's podcast, the Everything Ham Radio podcast, he just interviewed Jason, and it's a great interview. So if you're interested in ham radio and RC flying and what's happening in that world, you should check out Curtis's podcast. It's a very good episode. So yeah, I think anything that draws you to the hobby, and there's so many things that can. I'm curious also, there are some other ham groups there as well. Were you guys in the same area? Who else was there near you?
We are in the same area, and in fact, over the years, the Maker Faire organizers have realized that there's a core group of hams that come. So we have the Maker Faire booths are designated by 10 by, just like a trade show. They're designated by 10 by 10 squares. We have 60 by 10 feet, which is divided up into 3 groups at the fair. And so there was, besides ourselves, there was Brian Yee and Wayne Yoshida were there, and they have a setup that's kind of more focused on the microwave amateur radio, but also a lot of hands-on home-built gear. Definitely a lot of Arduino stuff. They did some of the HSMM, the ham mesh networking, and had a few interesting displays on some, like they have a lightning detector and some other stuff like that. So then besides them, they had a 10 by 10 booth that was for the VE sessions. And so I guess the cachet was I got my license at the Maker Faire, which, and maybe people would see that as a badge of honor. So I'm not sure that the notion of testing on a noisy Maker Faire show floor is the right idea, but they did have a high number of people who came in, and they even had some trifectas. They had one woman who came in and got Tech General Extra all in one sitting. A few people walk in, they try it just cold without even studying. Minimal success with that. But I think they gave away a lot of information about getting licensed as well. And one thing that we want to do, and I keep asking the Maker Faire organizers to do, is just to actually designate this area in what we term Radio Row. And I've been asking Sherry Huss, who's the lead of the Maker Faire, to do this for quite some time. And so finally this year we noticed on the program that in what they call Zone 2, which is the building where we're in, they actually had designated Radio Row. So that was a real honor, because it recognized that continuing commitment that we have been putting forth to try to make this an important part of the show, and probably as an outgrowth of some of the work that I've been doing behind the scenes. Last year at PacificCon, I met with Tom Gallagher, the new CEO of the ARRL, just before he came on, or rather just after he came on. And he and I had breakfast and we talked, and he came in and said, my strategy is amateur radio and STEM education and Maker Faire. And I'm told you're the guy. So how do I do that? What I did was I plugged him into Sherry and hosted a few conference calls to get them talking. And I think the league is gradually coming around to this notion that this is important. And I think the Maker Faire organizers are coming around to realize, how impactful amateur radio can potentially be to what they're doing. So this was the first year that alliance had hit the ground, and we saw some of that with the discount for amateur radio operators that was offered. And hopefully going forward, we'll see more. The one thing I don't think we'll ever see is a date deconfliction between Maker Faire and Hamvention. I think those dates are set in stone, and there's always going to be this East Coast, West Coast thing going on for that weekend, and that's just the way that it's going to be.
So what's interesting about this is, after this portion of our show, I have an interview I recorded at Hamvention with Eric Venandy, KG6 NFJ, and he's been involved in basically creating what is actually turning into a very nice mini Maker Faire in Dayton, Ohio. He's the guy that recognized me by my call sign in the middle of MCM Electronics one day, and he's like, I listen to your podcast. But so this year they're going to actually have an amateur radio pavilion at the Maker Faire, and this Maker Faire is held in an absolutely stunningly beautiful park with these huge old growth trees with all the shade. I know Dara's going to be there. I'm going to be there representing Ham Radio 360 and the Workbench, and I think there's going to be somebody there doing some satellite stuff. But it is cool that they're actually making an effort to really highlight amateur radio as a tool in the Maker Toolkit.
I think so. I mean, it's anyone who wants to host a mini Maker Faire can pretty much do it. Maker Media will allow you to do it. You know, it's a pretty straightforward process. Really, what they're doing with mini Maker Fairs is allowing you to use their branding and their trademark. What they call the flagship fairs, which are the 3 in the United States, some of the ones that happen around the world. Those are ones that are actually run by Maker Media. But yeah, I mean, and this is hearkening back to that article that I wrote in QST, a few months ago, was anyone can host a mini Maker Faire. If you want to host a mini Maker Faire and, in your hometown in Kansas, then all you got to do is ask, and they're going to ask you for a few things to make sure that you don't sully the brand, right? That's they want to make sure that these things are done well. But I think that anyone who's organized a Hamfest could certainly also organize a mini Maker Faire. The other idea would be to say, well, why don't we host a mini Maker Faire in conjunction with a Hamfest, and have the two things happen co-located, so that you get the cross-pollination. That's another idea. So I would really encourage anyone who's interested in Maker Faire to, one, of course, to attend one of the flagship fairs, but 2, to consider doing a mini Maker Faire in their hometown. And it's great that they're doing one in Dayton. I think they did that last year, and it's great that they're doing it again. And of course, having that amateur radio component is awesome as well.
So Barrett, Kenneth, what were some of the other things that you guys saw in Radio Row? What were some of the other things people were showing off?
Well, as David was mentioning earlier, we kind of had the APRS and plain ADSB receivers, which is generally the first things that you do with the RTO dongle, and that was kind of a receiving thing. One of the Cal Poly guys, I forget his name, bought a KX3 and a mag loop along, and was trying to do some data modes on that. There was a licensing group next to us. By the way, George, I'm not sure if you remember this guy Larry who got in touch with us before he said he was going to come to Maker Faire and do his license.
Yes, I do. Did he come get his license?
He did, and he got a general.
Oh, good for him.
And I pointed him to the website and the mailing list, so he said he was going to join up. But,
yeah, actually, he did join the mailing list. Maybe he'll show up at Field Day.
Yeah, I did tell him about Field Day, and he was asking about HF gear. And I told him, don't buy anything yet. Come to Field Day, or even if not our Field Day, go to any Field Day and play HF before you go and spend any money. And then, Jeremy, there was the microwave guys who they always tend to upshow us on the booth layout because it looks a lot more professional. But they had some. They're definitely doing the homebrew microwave things. So that was the radio that I saw.
A lot of it was really just that you didn't see much traditional HF rag chewing amateur radio, right? Because but all of the booths here did a pretty good job of catering to this segment of makers. And Mark and I talked about this a lot on the last time both of us were on. But it very much we were everyone did a really good job of selling makers on the kind of stuff that would really engage them. And so the people that were asking, wait, didn't this hobby die 30 years ago? And we definitely we tried to stay away from the 30-year-old parts of it just to try and really get good engagement from the people that were there. And so all the booths did a real good job about that.
So in addition, because obviously amateur radio is just a very, very small part of this. And David, you gave us a good overview that it's everything from people doing large kinetic art sculptures to doing really geeky technical things. Why don't you go around the group and highlight what were some of the most interesting things you saw people working on? And Barrick, I'll start with you.
Okay, I tend to like the big flames, the big vertical flamethrowers, which are basically a sculpture which with a propane tank, and you can actually feel the heat blast on it from 50 feet away.
No, this was not in the ham radio booth, was it?
No, it wasn't. No.
I don't know. Maybe it was one of those, projects gone awry.
No. I that was on the Thursday while I was setting up. No, that was outside, and they're all that's basically the Burning Man influence on Maker Faire, I guess, and I do find that quite impressive. What's the other one I was going to say? Yeah, there weren't so many 3D printers this year. I mean, I think that has been, and that's now down in the background. I came to the conclusion, and I shared this with anyone who would listen to me while I was talking. My voice was literally non-existent after the weekend. But I came to the conclusion that Maker Faire is one of those places that if you don't know what you want to spend the next 6 years doing and the next, I don't know, $10,000 on, you can go and wander around and decide what hobby that you want to pick up. I mean, it's kind of a trade show for hobbies. And once I got myself out of the electronics and crafts booth that we were in, it's actually just really good going around, seeing what other people are doing, and don't want to belittle Hamvention or anything like that, but we tend to surround ourselves with people who are like-minded, and I think honestly, Maker Faire, although we're all makers, there's a huge aspect of humanity that we wouldn't even necessarily think of talking to. And as a maker, when I went to, say, get some food in the maker lounge, or you find yourself sitting down next to other makers and saying, oh, so what's your project, et cetera, and you can have some really good conversations maker to maker, and learn a lot about what they're doing, and seeing people, everyone was very excited about what they were doing, and that is great.
Yeah, the diversity certainly can't be underemphasized on this. I love to describe Maker Faire as the 21st century county fair, which is not so helpful to a bunch of my friends because a bunch of my friends haven't been to county fairs. But really, it gives you've got the quilters and the livestock and the cross stitch. It's all that sort of thing, except it's 21st century. So there's electronics, there's 3D printers, there's steam and arcs, electricity and everything. I would say that kind of, if just looking at the booths, kind of I loved the booth that was a one row over from us that was doing crazy clocks, where he took standard wall clock, 1AA clock movements, and he had I think it was an AVR at Tiny. He made his own movement for it so that it could advance the seconds hand at any speed that you wanted, right? And so he had custom firmwares that would run a clock on Mars time, or he would run a clock on crazy time where it would click a few seconds and then wait and then pause and then go click a few more seconds. And this, of course, he had a bunch of GPS clocks as well, which as soon as 15 minutes after the gate opened, his GPS receivers all went down hard and never came back because of this whole Part 15 noise violations everywhere. But so I loved his booth, and then I love the kinetic steam guys. These guys are out near all of the big flame fire exhibits outside, and they've got a steam boiler and then a steam engine and a spinning a crankshaft that runs a set of printing presses. And so every year they're out there printing beer coasters, and it's they have a 4-color pattern. So they've got these 4 steam powered, old school New England style printing presses printing beer coasters. And the diversity just goes on, right? I love going out in the bazaar where there's all these people selling custom T-shirts, and it's just fantastic. But really, more than the booths and everyone's projects, I just love catching up to the actual makers, right? And that definitely can't be underemphasized. I love meeting new people that are excited about whatever it is they're doing. I also love catching up with all of my internet friends that I only get to see once a year, right? I mean, for Hamvention is absolutely that, and it's one of those things that it's every year. It's Hamvention's getting a little bit more tempting than before, but I've got a ton of maker friends in electronics and woodworking and all of my other hobbies that I only get to see them once a year at Maker Faire, right? And so the Maker Faire itself, like, yeah, it's neat, and I go to it, but it's really like I would say that I'm actually much more excited and always much more looking forward to going to the after parties where I get to just hang out with makers, not in the huge Maker Faire itself, but just hanging out afterwards, showing them, and they'll show up willing to show off their kind of half done stuff at any of the parties that happen afterwards.
So one thing I'm wondering as you're talking about this, I mean, it's funny because everything you're describing is for somebody who's not been to Dayton. Those are the same exact things as far as sharing like the core fundamentals of the love of the hobby, right? That we would describe about Dayton. When I went to Midwest Rep Fest earlier this year and was getting to actually spend time with like giants in the community. And it was just like hanging out with people and getting to actually spend time and hear people like try to problem solve. I mean, it's so inspiring, and it really reinforces how important community is. Now, this year in Hamvention, they were hoping for about 30 to 35,000 hams. I don't know that an official number has been released yet. I've heard about 30,000, which would be up about 6,000 from last year. How many people come to Bay Area Maker Faire?
The official count is not out yet, but I heard unofficial counts that they exceeded 150,000. That's in line with what we've seen in previous years. I know 2 years ago, the number was 145, and then last year they exceeded 150. I think they did that again this year. I did notice that Sunday, which is traditionally a somewhat slower day, was actually pretty busy right up through the end. So I would be easily willing to accept that we exceeded 150,000.
Wow. So, and David, I didn't mean to keep you from answering the previous question. It just, the way that this gets described, and as I look at pictures and the amount of Twitter coverage there was of this thing, I mean, it definitely seems much larger in scale. So, what were some of the more interesting things that you saw?
I had a chance to take Caroline Kenny from QST out around the fair, and so she was flown out by the league to visit with us. The Maker Media folks helped her with her travel. And then so she came out to report on the fair. And so I said, what I want to do, you've never been here before. I want to take you around and just give you a tour of the fair. And so I actually saw a lot more this year, sometimes than I would normally, because I forced myself to do that to take her on this tour. I was really impressed with the number of booths that were focused on STEM education, and particularly on STEM education for girls. I think that that's a really underrepresented issue in our society, which is that I think, if I remember correctly, the statistic that I've heard is something only like 0.4% of teenage girls identify technology as an area where they want to focus, which is just crazy, right? I mean, you can think that how many jobs are we going to have to fill in technology over the course of the next 20 years or even the next 10 years? And are those really all going to be filled by boys or men at the time? And so how do we encourage women to get involved in technology? And I think it's interesting when you go to the Maker Faire, because you get to see how girls see tech. Now, I'm a father, I have 2 daughters, and so I'm increasingly aware of this sort of a gap between technology and what my daughters are looking at. So one of the things that we did in our booth this year was that the ARRL sent out a number of what were called maker keys, and these were these little projects that they came out with last year, which it's just a Morse code buzzer, but it's super simple. It's a battery holder, a resistor, an LED, a buzzer, and the key itself is actually the PC board that gets broken off and cantilevered on some hardware. And so it's super simple for a kid to build it. And we had a couple of soldering stations in the booth, and we allowed the kids to come in and build this key. The league was kind enough to just send them to me. We didn't charge for them. We just gave them away. And we had a number of kids that come through, and we did little builds with them just to show them how to solder. And so, you're working with sort of 6 to 10-year-olds in this case. And the thing that was funny to me was we get to the end, and just before we're going to put the buzzer in, and I would say to the kids in kind of this quiet voice, and I would sideways look at their parents. I'd say, okay, now you get to decide if you want to put the buzzer in. By the way, the buzzer is going to drive your parents crazy. Do you want to put the buzzer in? They all like get this big wild-eyed look, and they go, yeah, totally, we want to put the buzzer in. So that was really rewarding, was to work with those young kids and to see them getting interested just in a basic solder project. And yeah, then okay, now they have a Morse code key, and we give them a little Morse code sheet, and I'd say, okay, before you leave, you have to send your name to me in Morse code. So they'd struggle a little bit with the code, and not pitching Morse code, but just pitching sort of an application of the thing that they had just built. Outside of amateur radio, I think the one thing that I really is memorable for me was I found a group of glass blowers, and I had never seen the glass blowers at the fair, but they were tucked back in this little corner that I had never been into. So as I was walking Caroline around, I showed her we stumbled upon this little glass blower area, and these people were doing just amazing work right there on the fair. They're just building these things right there on site, colored glass and these shapes and animals and vases and things like that. And it was just really amazing work. And that's what strikes in my mind as the thing that I saw this year that really sticks out outside of the technology stuff.
Yeah, that definitely at Hamvention, you have a lot of vendors and a lot of folks selling their wares, and they're the same people dragging the same boxes of stuff that they've been dragging to Hamvention for 30 years and never sell. But it's still all, with the exception of the gutter guard and the beef jerky and the folks selling swing chairs, it's all pretty much focused around amateur radio. And that's one of the things that's so diverse about making. And I remember in the beginning, everybody was like, oh, making is microcontrollers, but it's not. It's blacksmithing, it's glass blowing, it's fiber works, it's art. It's all of these things. And it's cool to have a place where all of these things are showcased and available for people to experience. Honestly, I'm jealous. I mean, and that is, you're right. I mean, this the fact that that Hamvention and Maker Faire co-occupy this time or that weekend is really disappointing. Now, I know I will come to a Maker Faire because it's actually very important to me that my daughter get exposed to all these things. And I don't care if she ever learns how to write code. I would like her to, right? I would like her to pursue something in engineering because that's, for us, that's our dreams of our daughters. But at the end of the day, what's really important is that she takes that mindset that you can do things that you may not necessarily have the skills to, right? That you can learn new skills, you can build things, you can make things, you can do art, but that she has some form of a creative outlet, be it professionally or as a hobby, is something that is very important.
I really agree with that. My youngest has actually really sort of, because she's been exposed to the Maker Faire thing now for quite some time, and she, half of her life has been watching me go to the Maker Faire every year. So in the past few years, she's come with me on one of the days, and last year she came to the Maker Faire, and she went out and bought. I bought for her tubes of zip ties, colorful zip ties from Home Depot, and we took them to the fair. And she was sitting there just basically zipping them together, and she was making necklaces and earrings and wristbands. And when Jerry Ellsworth came to the booth, she decorated Jerry's badge with zip ties. So, and Jerry even tells the story that she still has that hanging next to her workbench, the zip ties that my daughter put on with her was something that she really recognized from the fair as being one of the memorable moments. And so she's become very creative. And I think the Maker Faire has, to some extent, brought that out in her, and that she becomes very inspired by seeing girls doing things in tech or girls doing things with art. We had a booth in several years now. There's been Michael Schiess from the Pacific Pinball Museum in Alameda, California, who comes every year with a trailer full of pinball machines, and he has displays not only for the pinball mechanisms, but how do they work? So there's this whole science of pinball thing, and it has to do with electromagnetic coils and actuators and thumpers and lights and how do the numbers change in the back, how do the number wheels work. And so if you have any interest in pinball, then you get this huge opportunity to see like how and learn how a pinball machine works. And their entire display is basically showing you the guts of a pinball machine, so that maybe you learn a little bit from that. And that's it's not just a thing that you put money into, but it becomes something that you can understand the basic physics of how that works.
So complete sidebar that I'm not going to go too deep on, but there is an insane amount of interesting things that have happened in the history of modern, and when I say modern, I mean in the late 70s and 80s, electronic pinball machines. It's as far as like the thing that, like, you always hear the horror stories about the engineer that gets hit by a bus. There are stories of pinball machines that literally the person who designed it died and they needed to be able to fix it or continue manufacturing it, and some of the reverse engineering that went into that. Anyway, Google the history of pinball, because there are some really awesome stories out there about that.
And Jeremy, when you come out here to visit, and I'm going to insist that you come out here to visit, I'm going to take you to Alameda, and we're going to go to the Pacific Pinball Museum.
Oh God, I would love that. I would love that.
It's just great, and I'll make sure Michael's there so you have a chance to meet him too.
Pencil in Baycon in January. Plan to come out for that.
See, now,
you could be our guest speaker.
I was going to say, George knows that I'm not somebody who likes heat, and I understand California can have that. So if I come in January, I feel like that would be a good cool time of the year.
Where do you live?
I live in Ohio.
And that doesn't get hot?
Yeah, it does. But you got to understand. So when I lived in Seattle, that was like the perfect climate for me, because it only got hot between like the 2 weeks leading up to 4th of July. And then the summer was low humidity, low 80s, and sunny every single day between 4th of July and Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Northern California, San Jose, it's warm, but it's not humid. So, having lived in New Jersey, having gone to boot camp in New Jersey, I can tell you it's a lot more comfortable out here.
Awesome. So before we switch over into our field day topic, what are some things that you guys would like to leave the listeners about amateur radio and Maker Faire, or making in general? And I will start with Kenneth.
Well, so I mean, first of all, I'll point out that if you're interested in pinballs and you're in the Bay Area, the California Extreme Conference is also fantastic. Just to belabor a totally off-topic thing, they take the entire Santa Clara Convention Center and they fill it with free pinball machines, and it's like a 2-day thing where for $30 you go in and play as much pinball as you ever want. So if you think the museums in the Bay Area are great, the conference is also fantastic. As far as Maker Faire, I absolutely love it, just mainly to meet the people and the other makers, and to get spread across all these other disciplines, because it is so easy for us in amateur radio to go out and get lost in the weeds and forget that there is other cultures out there for the same sort of very similar hobbies, and how much we can learn from each other. And as far as it always being on the same weekend as Hamvention, it's one of those things that, and I see a lot of people grapple with this. Maker Faire is one of those things that is absolutely amazing your first year, and it's pretty good your second year. And then by the third year, everyone's always really disappointed they don't have the same complete overstimulation high that you get the first time you go to Maker Faire. And so I'm seeing a lot of people kind of come to this realization that it's very viable that a lot of us are going to start doing this one-on, one-off thing. And so and I think a lot of people at Hamvention kind of have the same thing. It's like, yeah, it's the same vendors every year, and it's the same junk in the flea market. And so I would encourage anyone who's been going to Hamvention for 20 years, take 1 year off, come to Maker Faire, and then when you find it absolutely amazing, which you will, you don't have to come back every year to Maker Faire. And so going back and forth between the two of them, I think would be a very strong plan for anyone who's interested in both hardcore amateur radio and broadening their horizons.
Sounds like good advice. Barrick?
The maker movement, or the make aspect, along with STEM, is definitely the future of our hobby. And getting people to realize that you don't need Morse code, or you don't even need to speak. You can just go and build things. And with microcontrollers and things like that. It's never been easier to do that. So I honestly think that is that is the future of amateur radio and getting people interested and involved. So that's kind of my takeaway from amateur radio at Maker Faire. And also agree with Kenneth. Come to Maker Faire and take a look around, and you won't regret it. Although it might get a bit busy.
I was very thankful for the brutal heat this year, that it kind of kept the crowds a little bit reasonable for the whole weekend. Usually it just gets insane by noon on Saturday. So I was glad that the weather was so terrible.
What do you characterize as brutal heat?
Gosh, it was like 95 or something. Ooh. It was pretty bad.
Well, the downside to that, the brutal heat outside just brings everyone inside. So
air conditioning was glorious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when it worked. Yeah. Our booth inside just got a lot of traffic later in the afternoon because people were cowering from the heat.
And David, I'm gonna snipe on you again. I apologize. Are there vendors there selling stuff? And I don't mean just like your normal like Etsy or Tindy vendors, but I mean, are there like major name brands that show up to sell their wares to attendees?
In years past, I would say 2 or 3 years ago, there was this sort of a corporatization movement that seemed to be like all of the companies suddenly decided that they had to be at the Maker Faire because their employees had gone, and they, went back to their marketing departments and said, well, we really need to have a booth. So I think, as I recall, it was, Intel and Cypress and all these chip vendors were there. And I think this year there was less of that. So I was kind of happy about it because it kept room for smaller companies. There certainly are people that are selling things. And if you want to buy a 3D printer or a laser cutter or some sort of tool for your shop, then definitely they will do so. And there was a lot of people there that were launching Kickstarters. So if you're into sort of giving people money in the hopes that they'll build it for you sometime in the future, there was a lot of that. There were, obviously there are vendors that are selling Raspberry Pis, Arduinos, displays, gibbets and gizmos for doing microcontroller stuff. I think Barrick bought a really nice case that had a heatsink for a Raspberry Pi 3 that was kind of neat. It was a metallized case, so it would have a passive heatsink to pull away from the hot chip. And so certainly, I mean, you could, definitely advice for the Maker Faire. Come with some cash in your pocket, similar to as you would do at a Hamfest. Be ready to purchase things. Chances are the credit card reader won't work because it's tied to the guy's phone, and the guy's phone's going to be offline because of the noise.
I just remembered one thing, and I don't know why I forgot this. This is one of my highlights of the weekend. One guy came up to the booth and was talking to me, and he'd seen my SDR-based test equipment last year and my kind of hand-wavy setup. It wasn't really looking good. Anyway, he told me that he's just about to launch a Kickstarter where he was inspired at Maker Faire last year, seeing the stuff that I had. And he's doing a VNA, I don't know, I think it's like one of these 10 megahertz to 6 gigahertz things. And he's just about to do a Kickstarter on that. And the fact that it inspired someone to go and make their own thing, that actually made my weekend when I was talking to him. So.
Well, I wish you could have been in our booth with us at Hamvention for the number of people that came by and either were saying, I never would have picked a soldering iron up if it weren't for this analyzer kit. I never would have looked at a microcontroller. I never would have bothered to learn anything about an Arduino. I never would have built something were it not for this kit. So, I mean, you definitely, you have made an impact on at least, gosh, George, what are we up to? Like 600 sold now?
We are over 650 at this point.
So almost 700 people. Like you have, your design has had an impact in people's lives to get them making something that is actually useful.
And that's again really great news. That's kind of what I set out to back at Pacificon all those years ago when I came up with the PIC version of it in George's garage, if you remember.
I do indeed.
So yes, it's really good that people are building their own stuff. So,
actually, I'll share one little story with you. So there was a girl who I won't name the school that she went to, but she was there with an uncle, and the uncle picked up one of each of the boards that we had, and she was standing there, and she'd recently become licensed, and she was very interested in STEM, but was in kind of a rural area and didn't have a lot of people to work with and not a lot of Elmers, and was just kind of shy around the whole thing. And, she's like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know what's going on. And so, I actually ended up giving her a couple of our boards and not charging for them. And I said, please, whatever you do, like go across the aisle to Debco and spend $5 on a soldering. Just try this. And just try this. And she almost had tears in her eyes, like from the encouragement. So, I mean, I hate to sound dopey, but some of the work that we have done is actually like kind of making a little bit of a difference in people's lives. And that's the most humbling part about all of this.
Actually, on a related note, when I saw we had the soldering setup that David was talking about earlier. Well, one thing I found was kids would come in and they'd be soldering, and then you'd find out that mum or dad was with them, and they had done soldering before a long time ago. And I kind of said, so do you want to use this as an opportunity to do some soldering with your kid, to show your kid what to do? And A, it got them back into doing it, which is always good, and B, it fostered some, I don't know, parent-child time, which they could take away with them, and you could see them doing it again later at home. I mean, so it's not just soldering at Maker Faire, never to do it again. They were actually sharing an experience which you could tell was going to last longer.
Awesome. So, David, I'm sorry, we have completely stepped on you, and I warned you I was going to snipe you. So,
no worries.
What were some of your major takeaways this year?
So takeaways this year were that I think kids want to explore more than sometimes their parents let them. I'm very cognizant of this fact as a parent that there's a lot of helicopter parenting going on, and sometimes you need to just let kids put themselves into situations where they aren't exactly sure of the outcome. I think the Maker Faire is a great place to do that. And we, I had a couple parents that come in and say, hey, well, does your child want to solder this board? And they're looking at me like, you want to give my child a soldering iron? I was like, well, I started soldering when I was 6 years old. So, and my daughters have learned how to solder. And so, yes, I do. Well, isn't that dangerous? I don't know. I mean, define dangerous. Are they going to die? No, they're not going to die. Could they burn their finger a little bit? Maybe. But you know what? That's life, right? So if you're going to do this, you're going to have to, in order to learn, you have to make mistakes. And so I think one of the things that I saw was to give younger people a chance to make mistakes. And I think that the other thing that if I were going to make recommendations for people that are coming to the Maker Faire or a Maker Faire, definitely don't just try to do it in a couple hours. It's not something that you just breeze in and breeze out. You really, to see the fair, you truly need to spend all 3 days. So if you can afford it, spend the money, plan to be there every day. Be open-minded, right? Be open-minded to what's around you. Don't come in with preconceived notions. One of the things that I think is really great about the Maker Faire is that when I first came into the hobby, I would hear the lamentation, people don't like to make things anymore. They don't like to work with their hands. They just want to buy something. They're consumers. Nobody builds things anymore. And that's why the hobby is dying. 150,000 people in one place for 3 days who are all there to see the guts of everything and how it works clearly indicates to me that people, in fact, do want to build things, that they do want to work with their hands. And I think it's incumbent upon us as amateur radio operators to ask the question, why do people want to build things, but they're not necessarily drawn to amateur radio? And I think there's some soul searching that is involved with that. I was very encouraged by Tom Gallagher's comments to me at breakfast at Pacificon last year, because he really seems to get it. He seems to understand that in a lot of ways we've caused our own problem, and now we need to fix it. And I do believe that Tom has a vision for helping us get down that road. And so I was very happy to have his support, especially this year. The league told me, they basically said, what do you want? We'll send you whatever you want. And so they sent us books and Morse code kits and batteries to go with it, and pretty much anything we asked for. And they sent me, like, my wife called me up, sent me a text message actually, and said, you just got 17 boxes from UPS. Where should I put them? First of all, where should I put them? Second of all, what the heck is all this stuff? And we had piles of stuff. So it was really gratifying to have that level of support. And I hope that we as a hobby can use the enthusiasm of the Maker Faire to revitalize our own hobby and to take it into the next direction, move it into the 21st century. I think we're doing that. I think we're getting down that road, but we need to keep going.
I think that is a good outlook. George, is there anything you want to add? You've been awful quiet so far.
Oh, I've been enjoying the conversation since I wasn't at Maker Faire. Haven't been there for several years. It's fun to listen to the stories and how big it's gotten. The one thing that really strikes me listening to what you were saying, David, is that if I think about the kinds of things I would imagine would be of interest at a Maker Faire and map that into some things that we saw, Jeremy, at Hamvention, there's a lot of interesting parallels. I mean, if you look at some of the more interesting products, to me anyway, at Hamvention, there was some pretty cool stuff. The whole Wi-Fi backhaul, repurposing that stuff for radio communications support, all of the digital mobile radio hotspot stuff. There were some other groups that we saw that were doing like the ADSB, but for satellites, where people were deploying Raspberry Pis at their home station and networking them together and receiving telemetry from satellites and then aggregating that data centrally. All these kind of things that are very kind of hardware, software, construction, networking, all that, those elements that I would imagine you would see at a Maker Faire. We are seeing things like that in the amateur community. So it's fun to kind of see how there's this cross-pollination. And I'm very heartened about what you're saying, David, with the league under their new leadership, realizing that that's really where the future is going to be, which is not to say CW is going away tomorrow, because I love CW on 20 meters. I think that's awesome. But there's this whole other more modern world. And as a hobby, we can really enjoy our traditional stuff that we love, and we can embrace this new stuff. And I think that cross-pollination is going to be the key. So you guys going out there and representing the amateur community and drawing people in is really a great service. I mean, I'm sure it's a lot of fun, but it's a really great thing for you guys to be doing. So actually, thank you for being ambassadors, frankly, for our hobby.
Well, thank you. That's nice of you to say that. I do think that I do think that the hobby is a big tent, right? And it's got room for everything. And there was a time when people sort of took a bit of a closed mindset to it and said, well, this is what the hobby is. We're going to limit it to that. We want to hold on to those traditions. And if you're not part of that tradition, then you're not part of the hobby. So Kenneth, weren't you the one who told me that after you got licensed and you went looking for a club, that you were having a hard time finding one because the clubs that you encountered were kind of stiff-arming you and saying you're not a real ham because you came in after the code test went away?
Yeah, it was awful. Like 2008 was just a terrible time to try and get into amateur radio as someone in his 20s, and having never taken an Element 1 test. Like it's gotten much, much rarer, and we've gotten much better. But yeah, I still get flack for, well, you never took an Element 1 test, so you don't know what being a real amateur radio operator is. Yeah. So yeah, it was infuriating. right? And like what I don't know if it was better or worse, but when I ended up getting a W6 call sign, and they would mistake me as having had an extra call sign, it got better. So no, like I hold no respect for those guys that think that Morse code is the only way to be a true ham, right? I think I've gone off this before, but there is no the real to be a real amateur radio operator. It's nonsense.
I completely agree with that. I mean, I think there's enough room in innovation and enough room in technology and enough room in amateur radio for us to allow, if you're following the rules, then you know what, via con Dios, do what you want. If you never want to pick up a Morse code key, that's fine. I don't care. And if you just want to pound brass all day, that's cool too. I don't have to love what you do to love the fact that you do it, right?
So I think the key thing here is really an open mind. I mean, I think you can come into the hobby loving something. Like you can start out, let's say, as a younger ham, and say, hey, I got interested in this because of APRS and what I could do with computers, or maybe some sort of crossover in the Pi Arduino world. I've met a lot of people who come in with an interest, let's say, from that angle, and once they get into the hobby, they wind up picking up CW, because like by the time you get through what you could do with APRS, like, okay, I want to learn another thing. We have the same variety of people in the ham radio world, and it's that cross-pollination that keeps it young and fresh and interesting. So, when you come into the hobby, whether you're younger, middle, or old, whether you're technically savvy or not, you're bringing something to the party, and it's David's point about it's a big tent is absolutely the case, and the important thing is to be open-minded, and who knows, you might actually enjoy something. I mean, myself, in our repeater club here, we have multiple digital repeaters, and DMR is taking off, and the last thing that I need is another distraction. Oh, how about DMR? No thanks, I'm full up with other things right now. But at Dayton, I thought, well, what the heck? So I got a DMR radio. Now I'm playing with that, and it's really fun. So it's not better or worse than anything else that I'm doing. It's just another thing. So I think that open-minded approach is really key. And frankly, the clubs that have members who don't take that tack, those are the clubs that they're going to die out. So the trick to being a successful club is being opening and welcoming, and have an open mind to learn new things, and really encourage the new ham or the new member of the club and find out what they want to do. What do they bring to the party?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've been doing with Baynet, right? So Baynet was specifically designed to sort of be a different kind of an organization, and we've always been very welcoming. And, it's funny, George, because there are so many times when I talk to people about Baynet, and I'm sure you get this as well. Let's say, well, how many people are in your club? And you say 0, right? I mean, there's really 0 people in Baynet because it's, there are 3 board members. It's a benevolent dictatorship, and everyone who's involved is simply involved because they want to be there. We don't have dues, we don't have bylaws, we don't have meetings and officers, and because of that, it's an opportunity for people who are open-minded and curious about technology and amateur radio technology. And we provide a framework on which those people can hang their various decorations that they want to put onto the Baynet tree, right? And I think that's why we've grown so quickly is because we have been very open to that idea. We don't have predefined notions about what it is. If somebody wants to come in and say, hey, I want to work on satellite data telemetry, then you go, great, that's awesome. Post to the list and see if anyone wants to join up with you.
So, by the way, the funny thing is, even though we have 0 members, our groups.io mailing list currently has 293 members.
And when I tell people that number, they're amazed that we've gone from nothing in 2005 was when we had the original Baynet conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And then, I guess it was 2006. And so we went from, hey, we should do something, to now 10 years later, we've got almost 300 people. And people would say, well, how do you do that? Because we're losing members left and right. And you go, well, first of all, we don't have members. I mean, that's one thing, but we're also not expecting people to adhere to what we think the hobby is. We didn't create a club of people who thought the hobby was one thing. We created a group of people who were interested in being curious about what amateur radio could be. And that's the distinction.
Well, gentlemen, I want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us this evening as we kind of deconstruct Maker Faire. I mean, I definitely have learned a lot about it, and it is definitely something that sounds very interesting. And it's nice to see that there is a concerted effort to bring amateur radio in. So we're going to shift topics onto Field Day. Barrick, I think you're going to stick around for a little bit, but let's go ahead and say our goodbyes. David, W6 Delta Tango Whiskey, if folks wanted to find you online, where would they look?
Well, my Twitter handle is at W6DTW. You can also find me at my call at awrl.net.
All right. And Kenneth, if folks wanted to find you, where would they look online?
My long form blog is blog.thelifeofkenneth.com. On YouTube, just search for Kenneth Finnegan. And then I am the most active on Twitter, where I am just at KWF.
Awesome. And Barrick, if folks wanted to find you?
Probably my call at K6BEZ at ARRL. Is it .org? I believe.
.net.
.net, sorry. I never send to it. I always just receive from it. But yeah, you can reach me there. And also berrick.dunn@gmail.com. You can reach me there as well.
All right. We won't post the email addresses so you guys don't get crawled and spammed. Thank you again so much. Can't wait to touch base with you guys again next year and see. I mean, eventually there's going to be a little friendly competition about, can we get more people going to Hamvention versus Maker Faire? But I will definitely be out there at some point in the next 14 years.
Look forward to meeting you then.
Yeah, we need to figure out, is it evens or odds? Because I don't want us to just keep alternating back and forth and never meet each other.
Yes, no, we don't want to miss each other. That's something that we will. I have a feeling that there's an opportunity just to schedule a trip for me to come out to the Valley and meet all you folks. No, the Valley, is that right? Am I saying that right?
Absolutely. The Silicon Valley.
Yeah. All right, so when we come back, we will be talking Field Day. Gentlemen, thank you again for your time. We will talk to all of you soon.
This episode of The Workbench is brought to you by Elecraft, makers of high-performance radios, amplifiers, and other great station accessories. Check them out at www.elecraft.com. And by Autodesk, the makers of Eagle PCB design tools, the software we use to design all of our Workbench build projects. For more info and your free copy of Eagle, go to www.autodesk.com/Eagle today.
As is always the case, hot on the heels of Hamvention is Field Day, which is approximately 4-ish weeks right around the corner after Hamvention. In this case, by the time we're listening to this, we've got just around 3 weeks to prepare and get ready. George, Barrick, you guys obviously do Field Day together and have been for quite some time.
Yeah, we always run a big club Field Day here, sponsored by Bayonet. And this year's no exception. So we thought we could run through some of the tips for getting ready for Field Day, and then maybe share some of our plans and Jeremy, your club's plans, and see what each other's doing.
Yeah. So George, at a high level, just cover some of the basics. Because I mean, from conversations we've had offline, our approaches to Field Day are radically different.
Sure. So before we get to the details, the way our club runs Field Day is this is a big annual operating event for us. We don't, we're not in it to win it as far as the points goes. Of course, we try to make as many contacts as we can. So we do operate in earnest, but it's not like a military deployment. So it's very much a kind of a gigantic club meeting in the sense that we set up stations, we encourage new operators, we encourage new hams to get on and operate. Some of us longer time hams do like to operate too, but we do like to get the new ops in there. It's always a great chance to set up gear and shake things out and try a new radio or a new antenna or a new mode, that sort of thing. So for us, it's just a big kind of festive ham event.
Or hot dogs and radio.
Sorry?
It's hot dogs and radio, I've heard it called.
Yeah, that's right. It's a barbecue, and we do some radio also. How about you, Jeremy? What's your club doing?
So our club is actually, we are a year old right about now, if I remember correctly. I think I got an email this week saying dues were due. Last year, we met in our vice president's parents' backyard, which is really convenient for me because it's like 2 miles up the road, literally up the road. So it's a club event. We do put signs out for the public. Last year, we actually did have one person drive by and stop in Ben's parents' backyard. But we set up a 10 by 20 field tent. Last year, we were 3A. That's probably about what we're going to be this year. Last year, everything was run off generators. This year, since we've gotten our footing a little bit better, I plan on running my station off solar yet once again with the battery box that I have. Not sure. We might try to run 2 stations off that and see how that goes, or we may supplement with lead acid batteries. But we basically have an operating tent, and then we have like a craft services tent where our president actually brings a Bun coffee machine, like an actual commercial coffee machine, and all that stuff is run off house power. But last year, I mean, it was all about food and camaraderie, and our families show up and our kids are there and they're running around playing. And, I mean, we go the full 24 hours, right? We start set up at the appropriate time, and then we actually operate all night long. I think some of us maybe got a 1 or 2 hour nap in the middle of the night, but there are always folks up and running radios. Antennas, I think this year, when we saw these guys at Hamvention, they mentioned they're going to try to hang a tri-band beam from a tree, which Ben's parents have some very large trees in their backyard, so that sounds cool. Last year is pretty much verticals and dipoles, so I'm looking forward to trying some new antennas this year.
So our field day is in some ways similar to that, in some ways different. So usually we do this as a camp out, but this year we may wind up being there just during the day and into the evening and break down before late at night. We're 3A also, 3 Alpha, in the Santa Clara Valley, and that means 3 HF stations and a VHF station. Typically, we have one station on 20 meters on a 3-element Yagi. We have another station running voice also on a non-20 meter band, like maybe 15 if the bands are open, or 40. And then the third station is going to be a digital station. And Barrick, you're running the digital station this year. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
I experimented with it last year, but I'm going to try and be a bit more organized this year. I'm actually going to be using a Raspberry Pi with running FL Digi. And my main plan is to use RTTY because that seems to be the better contrasting mode. And for anyone with mic fright, you can type or you can just use macros. But just to basically do RTTY using a Raspberry Pi, and I actually found a 12-volt capable monitor. Yeah, that's what I'll be setting up.
And what kind of radio is that going to be running on?
Oh, I was going to be using the Yaesu FTDX 1200, but I think I'm going to do the ICOM IC 7300 because that's got the nice USB port on the back, and that seems to work very well.
So I have a hint for you with that radio.
Okay.
Because that is also my field day radio. Did you use it at field day last year?
I didn't own that radio last year, okay. But one of the club members did bring one last year.
So one of the things that I noticed, the front end of that radio is not necessarily designed to be operating in a high RF environment. And so one of the things that we're going to be, hopefully we'll have in time for field day is a bandpass filter. Last year I did 40 meters. The antenna that I have can run pretty much anything from 40 to 10 just fine as a vertical. And one of the things I noticed is the 80 meter CW station was getting into the front end of my radio quite a bit. And the radio actually gave warnings about overloading the front end.
Well, yeah, that's actually a good point. So, yeah, I'll bear that in mind. But one of the things with field day is if you've got a few radios, you have someone on one of the stations who decides to change bands without telling anyone else, and you suddenly end up being stomped on. But what George brought along last year was a bunch of bandpass filters. And typically, in order to operate on a band, you needed to have that bandpass filter. So that was actually quite good at frequency coordinating.
So this year we're going to have 3 bandpass filters, 20 meters, 40 meters, and I think the third one is on 15. So the 20 and 40, especially with the sunspot cycle where it's at, those will probably be the two hottest bands. So we'll have filters on those for sure. And we always run battery. We never run off generator, and we're typically at about 50 watts. And even at 50 watts, we can get into each other's radios from time to time. So having the bandpass filters does make a pretty big difference. And they're not that terribly expensive. They're about $75-$80.
Well, maybe I will bring the FTDX 1200 then instead.
So we will have another 7300. So on the 20-meter station is a IC 7200. The second HF non-20 meter sideband station, that's a 7300. And then the VHF station is an ICOM 7100. So we're going to have the whole 7000 series, well, 3 of them anyway, running this year.
ICOM sponsoring our field day this year.
No, the funny thing that Elecraft is sponsoring this podcast. We better get us something in for Elecraft. So I'm bringing my KX2.
I'll bring in my KX2 as well. And
well, we'll have a KX4. So I'm gonna set up a little side station to really just show off the KX2, because I know people are interested. They want to see it. How does it work, and what do you pack up in it, and all that. So we'll have a little time to also play some QRP, not as part of the normal field day, but separately.
If I get bored, I might hike up to the top of the hill and operate from that bench.
Well, Wayne has done that on almost every field day. So, Wayne is like our super duper CW operator, of course. So N6KR. So Wayne comes to field day, and two great things happen. One is our CW point score goes way up. And secondly, I learned how to operate my Elecraft radios because he teaches me how to do something besides turn the AF gain control in the VFO. But usually he'll head up the hill with a KX3 or KX2 and go work some more CW stations.
And of course the Pactina.
And the Pactina, yeah, I'm going to put the Pactina on the KX2. So my favorite rapid deployment setup. We're also, Jeremy, going to play solar. So I picked up some PowerFilm solar panels, and John, who you met at Hamvention, also picked up some PowerFilm panels, and both of us have Jenison solar charge controllers, thanks to your recommendation for those.
And he'll be bringing his KX2 as well.
Ah, that's right. He got a KX2 at Hamvention.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like I still haven't decided if I'm going to take the 7300 out this year or the KX3 with the 100 watt amp, which I actually still need to send back to Elecraft. They made some minor engineering changes that involve the filters in the radio or in the amplifier, and I have like number 200 of the amplifier. I think they they changed the design around like 350 or 400, and they'll make the changes for me for free. I just have to pay to ship it to them and get it back. I think that the RMA number I've had for that has been open now for like 2 years.
You can just bring it to California.
Yeah, that was the funny thing. I should have taken it to Dayton because we saw both Eric and Wayne, and I could have just sent it home with them.
So, hey, when you come out to California to visit, we'll have to drive you down to Aptos and Watsonville, and you can meet the guys down there. That would be really fun.
Actually, it would be awesome if we could get a tour.
Oh, well, yeah, we can get a tour. I'm sure we can get some time with them on the podcast. That'd be really fun.
So, yeah, as far as antennas go, last year, an antenna that I've used the last several years I've done field day is basically a little Tar Heel 2 with a 17-foot radial on top of it. It's this MFJ collapsible radial. And then I have a radial field that is like 48 eighth wave on 40 meters. And so it does really good on 40 and 20. And we used that last year. What's nice about having the vertical is it's, 30 dB nulled to the dipoles that are up. So, you don't worry about the orientation as much, except not having the dipole like directly over the vertical. Last year we had a full, like a half wave 160 meter dipole. I think we're not going to do that this year. Like I said, they're talking about hanging this beam from a tree, and then I actually would like to get the Pac-10 out this year and run it on 40.
So our antennas are sort of similar. We've got 3-element Yagi on 20. As I mentioned, that's a super antenna YP3, which was made by our good friend Vern, who sadly passed away in the last couple of years, and we'll miss him a bunch. He was very active in the QRP world and started super antennas and made the little MP1 portable antenna and then the YP3 Yagi. And it's a really nice antenna that all comes apart and fits into a little 2-foot duffel bag. So we'll be using that. And then on station number 2, we're going to use a wire vertical. So it's basically a Pactena, a vertical radiator, and at the base there's an SGC auto tuner, and we run the coax and DC power out from the rig to the box, and a bunch of radials. I think we have about, I don't know, between 8 and 16 radials coming out from that, so it's ground mounted for any band. And then the digital station, I think the plan this year is to run the Cobweb that John is going to bring out. So that's 10 through 20. And if we need to run the digital station on 40, we can swap around to the vertical. So then VHF, we have a 6-meter 2-element Yagi, a 3-element 2-meter Yagi, and about a 7-element 432 Yagi. So the VHF station is going to be running full tilt this year on all bands. Not at the same time, but once we vacuum up all the sideband contacts on 2 meters, then we switch to 432, and then we'll switch to 6 meters and just kind of round robin. So hopefully we'll see it opening on 6. If HF is not so hot, hopefully VHF will be a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is about Field Day, though, is that everybody's listening. So
yes, that's right.
Doesn't at all help you on 6, but on the HF bands, Yeah, that's true. So
looking forward to it. So it should be a load of fun. We'll do a debrief after Field Day's all over. And I do have a couple of tidbits for the listeners. If you're thinking about getting your Field Day ready, a couple things you might want to think about. One is, if you want to go to a Field Day and you don't know where to go, you could go to the ARRL website. They have a thing called the Field Day Locator, which is a map, and you could plunk down your location, and it'll show you Field Day sites in your area with contact information to reach out to those clubs. So that's at www.arrl.org/field-day-locator. And you can check it out. And while you're there, you can buy some shirts and mugs and patches and other stuff with the Field Day logo. This year, the logo is kind of cool. It's red and white with a big beam and a tower. So it's nice. And as a reminder, Field Day is Saturday. Well, actually, Saturday, the 24th of June. And you're 3 Alpha. We're going to be operating 3 Alpha. Do you guys do any of the other point score enhancement bonus points like media publicity or set up an information table or any of that stuff?
Yeah, so we had an information table last year. We tried to do the media. Well, actually, I think they claimed the mention on the podcast as media publicity. So I guess that's convenient. We can get those points because we started a podcast. Actually, so can you.
Excellent.
We invited several local politicians. There was actually somebody who did say they'd come, but of course then they didn't. We didn't have any news media at the event. We like, as far as work, like getting the league beacon and translating that and all, or not the beacon, but their special transmission. Some of the stuff like that we try to do. Actually, I rail about this every year, but it stinks that we've put so much effort into being solar. I mean, it's great. It's great exercise, and you don't have to pay for fuel, and it's quiet and not smelly. It just stinks that you don't get more credit for the amount of effort you have to put into running a competitive, 100-watt barefoot solar station.
When we do the solar and battery, we don't really do it for the points. We do it because we just don't want the noise and the smell and the hassle. And so that's our main driver. Is it's just more pleasant to be around if there's not a bunch of big generators grinding away.
Yeah. So Hondas are completely silent. 10 feet away from the tent, you couldn't hear anything.
No kidding.
Yeah, wow. Did you guys not know that?
No.
Yeah, the Honda inverter generators are just about silent. Like, they even have like a silent running mode, which, for running at half load or 1/3 load of the total capacity of the generator, it means it runs quieter. But yeah, seriously, 10 feet away from the tent, and you could not hear the generators. Wow. Like, there would be lots of times we would walk over and be like, "Oh, are they still running?" Yeah, they're ninja silent.
Geez. What do you guys use for logging software?
Though I always get this call sounding wrong. It's I think it's N3 FJP. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's actually really good stuff. We used that for several years. We switched over to using Nick's Hamlog in tablets and phones with the Hamlog server. But if you're going to do Windows logging, I think the FJP stuff is very good.
Yeah, and what's cool is basically we have a like a router in a box that gets set up, and I can't remember. I think we actually ran like 150-foot Ethernet cable out to our tent last year. So we also had internet access, which is convenient because it'll go out and pull in from, I think, QRZ the details of the contact. The long and short of it is, right, this is not a contest. It is an exercise for you to deploy to the field to provide some level of capability. And honestly, the planning and the actually getting things set up is to me is more fun than operating.
Although for Bayonet, it is actually one of our 2 annual meetings. So that's how we do it. and also, as I told someone at Maker Faire, if you're looking at getting an HF radio and you're within the first half of the year, don't buy an HF radio, go to field day and try an HF radio. So that's a take-home for field day.
And then wait till Dayton next year to actually buy it, and you'll save a boatload of money.
George suggested this, and I got one for my radio. One thing, if you're just sitting down with headphones, someone comes up, they can't really listen, and headphones are really needed at field day. So I've got a little a headset preamp splitter, so you can actually split the headphones out up to 4 ways, and each one has their own volume control. So that's really good for people being able to listen in while you're talking.
That's a great point. I think I'm actually going to order one of those right now.
Do you know I can send you the link to the ones that we bought.
Yeah, if you know they're field tested and work, let's put that in the show notes.
Will do. And another thing we did was we also bought 4 cheap headphones. So these are over-the-ear headphones. So in addition to having the headphone amplifier, we have headphones, so people could use those. Now, of course, if you're all hot and sweaty after a while, you don't want to use the other guy's headphones. But anyway, their headphones are provided. The little distribution boxes that we're talking about have an input and 4 outputs. Each output has a pot, and the thing runs off 12 volts. So just make a little power pole to DC coax adapter to power the thing, and bring along a jumper that goes from your speaker out to the input of this thing. So, and you're good to go.
Is this one of those, like, I see 2 things that could be what you're talking about. One is made by Pyle, the other is made by Behringer, and it's basically a little headphone distribution amp.
Yeah, I think it's a Pyle one.
Yeah. I mean, it's $17, and the only question I would have is these are stereo. So are you only getting the audio in one ear?
No. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So the radio will actually put out stereo audio, and sometimes, I think especially on the Yellowcraft stuff, radios, you can flip the other channel in order to get some better listening experience. I can't remember what the technical term for that is, but no, these little headphone amps will actually do the full stereo.
So the ones that we picked up are Pyle. I just pulled it up here on eBay. They're about $20. Free shipping. So $20 a unit, Pyle 4-channel headphone, signal splitter, amp distribution, sharing amplifier box.
The PHA40. I'm dropping that in the show notes.
Yep, those are great. And I've tried those out. We've tested them out. We took them out to field day last year. The other thing I would suggest, they take 1/4-inch phono plugs. Mm-hmm. 1/4-inch plugs. You might want to also order off of eBay a whole bag full of the mini to 1/4-inch adapters, because a lot of the radios these days, the speaker output is a 3.5 millimeter stereo mini jack, and these mixers are 1/4-inch, so you're going to need an adapter. And if you look for a female 3.5 millimeter to male 1/4-inch, you can get them for like $1 a piece. So I'd get a bag of 10. So that way you could plug them in. So because all the headphones, all the cheap headphones you're going to buy also have the 3.5 millimeter jacks, or your earbuds or whatever. They have the tiny jacks. Nothing really comes with a big 1/4-inch anymore, except for the more professional headphones. And even those have often have the smaller plugs on them.
Yes.
Even my IC 7300 has the 3.5mm one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's pretty standard now. So
the Yaesu sitting above it has the 1/4 inch.
Yeah, and a lot of the radios have both. So so anyway, get a handful of adapters so you can always have that ready to go, and also the patch cable from the input of the from the output of the radio to the input of the distribution amp.
All right, I think that about covers it.
I think that's it. Hey, Barrick, thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciated the conversation earlier on Maker Faire and also on Field Day.
You are most welcome, and it's great to be here again. So.
Yeah, and we'll have you back to do an episode on scrounging together test equipment on absolutely no budget, and the interesting uses you will find for things laying around the internet.
And at some point, I'll try and get this antenna analyzer modified.
I would say,
by the way,
trying new diodes, or you had once even talked about putting a small amplifier on there.
Yeah, I want to put an amplifier in there. That would be really good for it. Although I still want to keep it in the realm of someone being able to build it at home by themselves.
We did get multiple requests, by the way, at Hamvention for essentially a VNA. So while you're at it,
yeah,
in my spare time.
Well, you could do it. It's not like you've never done it before. I'm sure you could make one of those in an afternoon.
All right, so folks, if you have feedback about the show, especially if you think it's too long, especially this episode, feel free to shoot an email to workbench@hamradio360.com. If you'd like to get a hold of me or follow me online, I am the Twitter troll. I don't troll people on Twitter. I shouldn't have said that. Twitter is my beat. I spend more time on Twitter than George. You can find me at KF7IJZ.
And I'm at KJ6VU.
And for all information about the show, our projects, etc., check out www.hamradio360.com and check out www.360workbench.com for information specific to our build projects.
Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
73. George, you're allowed to talk too.
You're on a roll, Mr. Host. I mean, that was kind of a pregnant pause. Go, you're doing fine.
They were at Bay Area Maker Faire.
And what a party it was.
Oh, no. This is in the blooper reel.
Okay. George, last week, no. All right, resuming. Beep. George, last week, no. Beep. George. George.
Keep going. You're doing fine. You're on the roll.
Is this technically our 1-year anniversary, or is that next episode?
Next episode, because this is 25. The next one will be 26.
So this is a closing out a year of episodes. Okay.
This is the penultimate anniversary episode.
We're so honored to be here.
You should be.
Well, we're happy to have you. You're worth every penny we're paying for you.
I appreciate that.